We're here with Dave Weeshoff, who is involved in trash. I want to hear about this. It's on an ocean. Can you give us like a summation of what's happening?
Yes, I'm a spokesman. I work with with Algalita Marine Research Foundation, and Algalita focuses on the science of how much plastic is in the oceans and the consequences and where it comes from. What can we do about it?
All right.
And so we know many of folks have heard the iconic words, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. We're the ones that basically started that awareness program to understand how much plastic is in the ocean and what can we do about it. And what we can do about it, it comes down, in summary, to the basics that we learn in kindergarten, and that is reduce, reuse, and recycle.
Right.
Because every piece of plastic that first off, every piece of plastic that has ever been manufactured is still on the planet somewhere.
Yeah.
And far too much of it is in the oceans.
Yeah.
And second is if we can reduce the amount of plastic we use, there's much less likelihood that it will end up in the oceans. And once it's in the oceans, like everywhere else, plastic is forever.
How is it getting in the ocean?
Much of the plastic in the ocean comes from the watersheds. In other words, from land-based sources. Our estimate is about 80% of the plastic in the ocean today comes from the land-based sources, and 20% of it comes from marine-based sources. Now, those could be
like throwing it off a ship.
Somebody illegally throwing plastic in the ocean from a ship, dumping it, and of course there are accidents and what have you. Right. But our estimate is 80% is from land-based, and that is someone throws, I like to use a red plastic bottle cap into the street, and eventually the rainwater will run that down the curb and into the catch basin of the stormwater system, and out into the ocean. And once it's out there forever.
How big is this patch?
Well, that's a good question, because what happens is this is floating plastic. And like everything that floats in the ocean, it gets consolidated by winds and currents.
Right.
And then it gets diffused as those currents and winds change and the weather patterns change. And so it's not one island sitting out there where you could go out and say, well, let's just clean it up.
Yeah.
It concentrates due to wind action, wave action, weather patterns, etc. And then within, fairly quickly it gets diffused, and then it sort of gets concentrated somewhere else. So it's not evenly distributed, but neither is it heavily concentrated, and it reconstitutes itself, if you will, this floating island of trash every few days or every few weeks or on a cyclical
Now, when
basis.
we talk about a floating island, I picture the bottom half coming down. How far does the island reach down into the water?
Well, we don't know for sure, but we do know that we test down to 30 feet.
Okay, and you still saw islands.
And you still see, well, you don't see islands so much, but because about half of the plastic we manufacture floats, and about half of the plastic sinks, but it may not sink all the way to the bottom.
Right.
It may get and find itself buoyant maybe at 10, 15, 30 feet below, and therefore it may drift. It doesn't just sink to the bottom and stay there. It may drift, but those currents may be different, or the concentration effects may be different than they are on the surface.
Yes.
And so it's really hard to tell. And there isn't, it's much easier, of course, to study what's going on the surface than it is to do below. But we do have studies that show we know it's down there. But it is not as concentrated as on the surface, but that's because that half that does sink can sink a little bit or very deep.
Right.
And so it's sort of spread out over what you could call a water column.
Do we know how much it's grown in the last in the last 5 years? I mean, is there like a 10% increase?
We do know that it is growing at least 10%, or 15 or 20% over the last.
Wow.
The study area that the area that we study year after year after year shows that is no question it is growing very much, maybe 6 or 8 times over the last 15 years or so. It is just dramatic, the increase. And we know that it's a huge problem. We know that it's not just a Southern California problem. It's just not a United States problem. It's a worldwide problem.
Yeah.
And once plastic is in the ocean, it is there forever.
Well, we're going to have to stop at that point, but thank you for talking to us for 5 minutes.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And we look forward to hearing more about how this progresses and if we can fix it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.